Hello YouTubers, and welcome back to my channel, the Virginia Bushcrafter. Hey guys, today I want to talk to you about me as being a beginner's bushcrafter. I started YouTube January 29th, 2022. And I made some videos which basically was during the daytime. I made quite a few videos that were not overnighters. So I want to talk to you about my journey as being a beginner bushcrafter. Now, I did not do my first overnighter until sometime in April of 2022. And I can vividly remember it was a cold night, sprinkling rain for a little while, but it was very cold, and that's when I experienced you would get very little sleep in the bush camping out by yourself. So I want to go over just some routine things to help anyone that's considering becoming a bushcrafter, and especially if you are a beginner. Now, when I go into the bush, one of the first things, the first thing that I do, I hang my rucksack or my backpack, whichever one I have. And I hang it with paracord and some of nature, part of a tree branch. Now I hang my rucksack because it somewhat helps to keep bugs and insects out of my rucksack because it's not directly on the ground. And it eliminates my rucksack from being on the ground, which all the time, most of the time, there is moisture in the air, and of course the ground is going to be wet. So in addition to keeping bugs out, keeping my rucksack dry, it makes it easier to get my items out of my rucksack because I hang the rucksack at about chest level. So I don't have to do any bending or anything like that. Everything that I need is readily accessible. And the next thing that it does for me, hanging the rucksack, it helps me to stay a little bit more organized, because if I need something, I go to my rucksack, I get it. When I'm finished with it, I can take it back. For an example, ferrocerium rod. You know, we have those small items that can get lost very easily. So when I finish with the ferrocerium rod, I can put it directly back into my rucksack. However, when I am going into the bush, the number one priority is shelter. That's right, shelter. Protect yourself from the elements of the bush. It could be most likely the weather, whether it is warm or freezing cold. Build you a shelter, especially if you're staying overnight. Now, I have built shelters after learning what I've learned, is to use tarps that are square, 12 by 12, 10 by 10, 8 by 8. You can make more configurations with a square tarp as opposed to a rectangular tarp. And I suggest all beginning bushcrafters use tarps. Now, when I use tarps, I am basically making a lean-to or an A-frame. And of course, the lean-to is basically, I usually use a 5 by 7 or 10 by 12, 8 by 10, and it's just a 45-degree angle held up with a ridge line. Now, I like the lean-to shelter because I can see in front of me, I can see on both sides of me, and I can just stand up and see what's behind me. So that's why I like the lean-to. But I've also built the A-frame, which is basically shape of an A. And what the A-frame does, it helps keep more of the warmth in your shelter as opposed to the lean-to. Now, again, I would advise or suggest a beginner bushcrafter utilize tarps. Now, I have gone a step further and used nature. I have made a debris shelter, a lean-to debris shelter, with the spine going, a spine slanted at maybe a 45-degree angle, and put some tree branches on the side. When it got greenery or boughs from trees, put those on the side, cover the boughs with leaves, and I had a lean-to debris shelter. Now, another shelter that you can build is also called a fallen shelter. That fallen shelter is basically a tree that has a down tree that is at a more or less like a 45-degree angle, and then you just put the ribs alongside and fill it with the boughs or the greenery from the other trees and the leaves, and then there you have it, a lean-to debris shelter. So again, I recommend beginners to use a tarp, make lean-tos, A-frames, but strongly suggest you get a square tarp. Now, once you have hung your rucksack, built your shelter, one of the most concerning things is making sure that you have enough water. We all know water is essential. You have to have it. Essence to life. And our body is 70% water. Now, I'm not going to go into why you need this water, going 3 days without water, and so forth. But as a beginner, bring your water. As a beginner, I would bring almost a little bit over a gallon. I would bring a 40-ounce clean canteen, a 32-ounce canteen, two 28-ounce canteens, 16-ounce water bottle with Gatorade. I made sure I had enough water. Now, if I go to a location and I know there is water, I know there's a stream near or a creek, I would bring a clean canteen and a 32-ounce and some containers to source the water. Once I source the water, put the water in those canteens. I would source the water, take it to my camp, filter it with a bandana or a coffee filter, and then purify it by boiling the water. So I know I had sufficient water. Now, one thing as a beginner that I have not done, but I have learned, and I'm going to try this, is that you can source water from a plant as well as a tree. Keep that in mind. But again, try to camp near a stream or a river, running water. Now, if you camp near a pond, a well, a lake, that's fine if you have to. But just remember, source the water. You have it right there. The lake, the pond, the well. Filter that water and purify that water. So these are just some of the things that I have learned as a beginner bushcrafter. Now, after we have hung our rucksack, built our shelter, secured our water, next thing of importance is food. How long do you plan to be into the bush? Is it for one day? Then you take 1 day supply of food. Is it 2? You take 2. But as a beginner, and I still do this because I am a beginner, bring your own food. Most importantly, bring your own food. Bring enough food according to how long you're going to be there. When 1/2 or 2/3 of your food has been consumed, the next thing to do is keep in mind to forage, fish, trap, or hunt. Now, I have not done any of those except fish and hunt, but it really wasn't related to bushcrafting. But those are some much needed skills to learn if you're going to be a bushcrafter. Now, the importance of that food is going to be to build those calories, because you are going to need the calories, whether you're there for 1 day, 2 days, however long. You're going to need calories because you're going to burn calories. So I'm going to speak from an overnighter point of view. Now, once you have your food taken care of, the next thing that I do is to harvest wood. Now, when I speak of harvesting wood, I am going to gather the wood. I am going as far out as maybe 50 yards to bring back large tree trunks, branches, twigs. That is harvesting wood. If I'm going to be there overnight, I am going to harvest enough wood to ensure that my fire will last all night until the next morning, or however long I'm going to be there. I'm going to make sure that I do not run out of wood. As a beginner bushcrafter, something that I learned, a large part of your time will be harvesting wood. Harvesting wood and processing wood. So let's talk about processing the wood that you have harvested. So when it comes to processing your wood, I am basically splitting wood. I am going with the grain of the wood. I am splitting wood openly. Processing wood, you also would use a saw. Just as harvesting wood, using a hatchet, using a saw or a large knife, when you're harvesting that wood, you may need that to separate wood from a limb from a tree trunk, part of harvesting. But when it comes to processing the wood, I'm basically splitting the wood along with the grain, and I'm usually using a large knife or a hatchet or a machete. But I'm processing that wood to make tinder, to make kindling, and to make fuel. Now, processing that wood is going to enable me to put a ferrocerium rod or flint and steel with char cloth to tinder which I have scraped off a tree trunk. And once I have processed that wood and split it to maybe index finger size or a little larger, I can then make feather sticks and curls. After I have the feather sticks and the curls, that's called my kindling, I can just as well use twigs and small pieces of wood. But once I have that tinder lit and I put the kindling on the tinder, I have a flame, I'm going to add the large pieces of wood, which is my fuel. Now, you have to do all of that processing of the wood to make one of the most important thing is the fire. You know, guys, we take fire for granted at home. We can press a button, flip a switch, light a big, strike a match, and we have fire. We have those luxuries at our residence, but in the bush, you don't have those luxuries. It's imperative that you learn how to use a ferrocerium rod, flint and steel, bow drill, hand drill, plow drill. As a beginner, I've become very efficient with using a ferrocerium rod, and flint and steel are very efficient. But I am also learning how to do a bow drill. In theory, I can't do it. I have to do it in practicality. So, as well as a plow drill. So fire is one of the important things that you will have to learn how to make, as well as manage that fire. Now, when you make your fire, you want to make sure it is in a suitable, safe place. You don't want your fire to get out of control or flames constantly getting blown out. So what I do, I dig a pit and I put other material, fire material, in that pit as a fire lay. And then I proceed to make my fire. You will, if you're going for an overnighter, you're going to need fire even if it's warm. You're going to need fire to boil that water if you want to make coffee or tea. You're going to need that fire to cook. And I personally can't imagine being in the bush overnight without a fire. Now, another thing as a beginner bushcrafter that I am improving upon is navigation. When I go into the bush, I always take a GPS system, which has worked 99.9% of the time. However, a GPS system, you can go into the bush and lose signals. That has happened to me before. That's why it is so important to learn how to use a compass. And that is one of the things I am doing right now, is improving my skills with a compass. Even to be a little bit more secure with navigation, learn to use a map, read a topo map. Learn to use paste beads. Learn to use a compass, protractor, and map, all in conjunction with each other. And another thing you can use is trail marker ribbons. These are something hunters use. You can just put them on a tree branch every 20 yards or so. That will help direct you out of the bush to your main trail so you know where you're going. So again, navigation for a beginner, learn as much as you can, but that compass, learn to trust your compass. All right, guys. Now, after the navigation, something that is very important that I use is cutting tools. My cutting tools consist of a hatchet, a survival knife, a saw, a carving knife, and an awl. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, well, you know, you really don't have to take a hatchet with you if you have a large knife. Well, maybe that's true for some, but for me, I am going to take a hatchet, a large knife or a medium knife, a carving knife, a saw, and an awl. Now, that hatchet, that chopping tool, that is going to be utilized for heavy duty wood building my shelter. That hatchet is also going to be used for splitting wood. I try to use my hatchet more than any other tool because I want to preserve all my knife, my saw, my awl, my carving knife as much as possible. But you have all those tools to utilize. Now, when it comes to a survival knife, my preference is a full tang high carbon steel knife with a thickness of at least, I've seen them from 1/8 all the way to 1/4 of an inch, but mine, I would prefer 2/16 all the way to a quarter of an inch. Now, my rule of thumb is if your knife is 4 inches or less, that is a small knife. If it is 5 to 6 inches, that is a medium knife. If it's from 7 to 10 inches, it's a large knife. And of course, anything over 10 to me is a chopper. So when I go into the bush, I prefer a large knife, 7 to 10 inches. That is going to allow me to split wood much easier than a medium-sized knife. Now, the large knives usually comes with a convex grind or a saber grind and a hollow grind knife. Whereas the medium knives, bushcrafter knives that are 5 to 6 inches, usually comes with a Scandinavian grind, which is great for feather sticking and all your other tasks while you are in the bush. The 4 inches or less are basically used for carving, making other tools such as a bowl, fork, knife, pot hanger. That is basically what I use my carving knife or my 4-inch blade, 4-inch knife. That is what I use it for. Now, when I'm speaking in terms of length, 4 inches or less, 5 to 6, 7 to 10, I am speaking in blade length. So another important thing about my survival knife, it must have a 90-degree spine. You may sometimes purchase a ferrocerium rod where the striker is not as great as you would like it to be, or it's shorter. You can always take that 90-degree spine that is high carbon steel and use that to strike your ferrocerium rod. Now, another thing about the survival knife, in addition to starting fires, splitting wood, you can use it to pierce into wood or stabbing into wood. But it has another purpose as well. That knife is used as protection. So that's the importance of a survival knife that I would tell all beginner bushcrafts to think about. Again, so that small carving knife, you're going to create tools like a bowl, a spoon, a fork, pot hanger, and even use that small knife for foraging. My saw is going to be used when I want to cut wood to a precise length. Also, if you are somewhere at night and you really want to remain somewhat stealth, a saw is a lot quieter than using a hatchet. And a saw is basically used to break fibers because you're usually cutting against the grain. Whereas when you're splitting the grain. But my hatchet and my saw, keep in mind, you are basically severing fibers, actually cutting fibers. That is what you're doing when you are chopping, or most of the time sawing. You can saw along with the grain, but if you want to sever fibers, more than likely you're going to be using a hatchet or a saw. Now, puncturing tools, an awl, that is used to puncture anything from putting divots into wood to putting holes into leather. And a lot of times these will come on a knife or a multi-tool. So again, guys, something that's important to me is having a chopping tool, a survival knife, a carving knife, a saw, and an awl. Now, after having all my cutting tools, the hatchet, large knife, carving knife, saw, awl, there's so much more to have as a beginner bushcrafter. So you always have a kit. Now, this kit, what's started in my kit, again, with shelter. If it's nothing more or less than a 5x7 Mylar emergency blanket, have something in your kit to make a shelter. Always, always, always have water. Bring water with you, or make sure you are near a water source, and bring your food. As a beginner, always bring your food, and have a fire kit. Again, a ferrocerium rod, flint and steel, your Bic lighter, and your matches. However, keep your matches and your lighter in your kit. Use that as a last resort. And again, when you're a beginner, there are so many things to have, but have adequate supplies and gear. You know, have your mess kit to cook in. Have a backup saw, a commando saw, your tent stakes or pegs. There is just so many things as a bushcrafter. Your notepad that you can write in the rain with, your whistle, your solar and battery pack devices, your telephone, your cords to charge up your phone. You will have a lot of supplies in that kit. Of course, your compass. But one of the most important things in that kit is going to be a first aid kit. More importantly, an individual first aid kit. So again, as a beginner bushcrafter, these are just some of the things I wanted to touch upon. But the last thing I want to touch upon is extinguishing your fire properly. I always have a designated canteen of water to help put out the fire. I am not going to just let the fire go out, put the soil over the fire, stomp on it, say the fire is out. I am going to put enough water on that fire, and I'm going to stir those coals around until they're coals and the embers until they are out. And when I fill that pit back up with the soil, I want to be able to put my hand on it and not feel any warmth. So that is what I consider properly extinguishing your fire. The last thing I'm going to touch upon is never go alone if you can help it. Now, I go alone a lot because it is really difficult matching schedules and so forth. But at some point, to be successful you're going to have to go alone. But let someone know where you are. Stay in contact with someone. So guys, I just wanted to give you this little bit of information. I hope I have imparted some knowledge in you concerning bushcrafting. So guys, and also remember this: father, son, mother, daughter, persons, and nature, we're all akin in some form or fashion. So get out in the bush, reconnect with nature, and have some fun. With that said, hit the like, share this video, comment, because we learn from each other, and subscribe to my channel, The Virginia Bushcrafter. Thank you. I appreciate your support, and I will see you on the next video.